In a millionaire's mansion, an arrogant wife unleashes her cruelty upon her husband's paralyzed daughter. Faced with humiliation and contempt, a simple housekeeper decides to confront power to protect the defenseless child. The clash between kindness and evil explodes into a silent war within the luxurious home. And when the truth comes to light, the lesson the housekeeper teaches forever changes everyone's destiny. The sun rose lazily over the mansions of Greenwich, Connecticut, on the outskirts of New York City, illuminating the imposing facade of the Sinclair residence. Julianne Perry adjusted her curly hair, tied in a low bun, smoothed the grey skirt of the suit she had bought especially for this interview, and took a deep breath before ringing the doorbell. Her trembling hands betrayed her nervousness. This job meant the difference between losing or keeping the small apartment she shared with her sister in the Bronx. At 28, Julianne carried on her shoulders the weight of 3 months of unemployment, accumulated bills, and a bank loan she had taken out to cover her mother's medical treatment before her passing. The employment agency had described the position as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The salary offered was almost double what was usually paid for a housekeeper in the region. Julianne had spent the previous night studying cleaning techniques and home organization, determined to impress. The door was opened by a middle-aged man in uniform, who introduced himself as Oswald, the family's driver. He led her down a path of Italian marble through a meticulously manicured garden to the main house. Julianne tried to hide her astonishment at the opulence of the place: expensive sculptures, ornamental fountains, furniture that looked like it was straight out of a design magazine. "Wait here. Mrs. Sinclair will be with you shortly," Oswald said, indicating a velvet armchair in the entrance hall. Julianne nodded, perching on the edge of the seat as if afraid to damage the expensive fabric. Her eyes scanned the walls, where paintings she recognized as works by famous artists hung under special lighting. "So you're the candidate from the agency." The voice cut through the silence like a razor. Standing at the entrance to the hall was Deborah Sinclair, a 35-year-old woman who exuded sophistication from every inch of her slender frame. She wore an impeccable white dress that contrasted with her tanned skin and discreet yet visibly expensive jewelry. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect bun, and her face, with flawless makeup, wore an expression of cold analysis. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Julianne Perry." She stood up quickly, extending her hand. Deborah ignored the gesture, circling her like a predator stalking its prey. "Let's be direct. I don't have time to waste. I need someone who knows how to do their job, and most importantly knows how to follow rules. This is not an ordinary house, and we do not accept ordinary staff." Julianne swallowed hard, nodding. "I understand, ma'am." "Follow me." Deborah turned on her heel, her designer heels echoing on the marble floor. For the next 40 minutes, Julianne was led on a tour of the 3-story mansion. Deborah meticulously detailed every task, from how to clean the Czech crystal in the dining room to how to organize the Egyptian cotton sheets. Julianne took mental notes, impressed by the grandeur of the place but also by the coldness with which Deborah spoke of her own home, as if it were merely a showcase for her wealth. "And this is the East Wing, where Louisa's room is." Deborah stopped abruptly before a closed door at the end of a hallway, her tone shifting to something more serious. "This is the most important part of our agreement." Julianne looked at the door, noticing that, unlike the other ornate white doors in the mansion, this one was simple and painted a light blue. "Louisa is my stepdaughter. She's 7 and uses crutches due to paralysis in her right leg." Deborah spoke as if describing an inconvenience. "She has lived with us since my husband Edward and I married 2 years ago. Her biological mother passed away when Louisa was 4. Julianne felt a pang of compassion for the child she had not met. "I see. Should I include her room in the cleaning routine?" Deborah's face hardened. "You will clean the room, yes, but there are specific rules. You are not to speak to Louisa. You are not to answer her calls. You are not, under any circumstances, to form any bond with her." Julianne frowned, confused. "I'm sorry, Mom, but—" "There are no buts," Deborah cut her off sharply. "Louisa is a spoiled, manipulative child. She uses her disability to get what she wants, to get attention. I have been working hard to correct this behavior, teaching her discipline and self-control. Any interference in this process will result in your immediate dismissal. Is that clear?" The severity in the woman's words sent a chill down Julianne's spine. There was something in the way Deborah spoke about her own stepdaughter that didn't feel natural. However, desperately needing the job, Julianne agreed. "Yes, ma'am." "Perfectly clear. Good. Now about your hours. You will work Monday through Friday, from 7 in the morning until 5 in the afternoon. Saturdays half day, Sundays off." Deborah continued walking now towards the kitchen. "Your salary will be deposited on the 5th business day. The agency should have already informed you of the amount." "Yes, ma'am. You start tomorrow." "And one last thing." Deborah stopped, turning to face Julianne with eyes as cold as ice. "My husband is a very busy man. He is rarely home, and when he is not to be disturbed. Household matters are handled directly with me. You are not under any circumstances to bring any issue to him." "Understood?" "Understood, ma'am. You may go now. Oswald will see you to the gate." Julianne left the mansion with a strange feeling in her stomach. The job offered financial security she couldn't refuse, but there was something disturbing about the atmosphere of that house, especially in the way that woman spoke about her stepdaughter. During the bus ride back home, Julianne couldn't stop thinking about the child behind that blue door, a child who was apparently being isolated from the world. The next day, Julianne arrived at the mansion promptly at 7 in the morning. Oswald greeted her at the gate and led her to a small room near the kitchen where she could store her belongings. Deborah had already left for her daily appointment at the gym and spa, leaving a detailed list of tasks for Julianne. First the bathrooms, then the bedrooms, living room, dining room, office, and finally the kitchen, instructed the head housekeeper. Mrs. Matilda, a woman of about 60 who supervised the staff's work. Mrs. Sinclair is very demanding. Everything has to be impeccable when she returns at noon. Julianne began her work with the bathrooms, impressed by the luxury of each one. There were 5 bathrooms in the house, all with gold-plated faucets, whirlpool tubs, and heated floors. She moved on to the bedrooms, leaving Louisa's for last, as indicated on the list. When she finally reached the blue door, she hesitated. She hadn't heard a single sound coming from the room all morning. She knocked softly, announcing her entry as instructed by Mrs. Matilda. "Excuse me, I'm coming in to clean." There was no response. Julianne turned the knob, entering cautiously. The room was large and well lit, with a window overlooking the back garden, but unlike the rest of the house, it was surprisingly austere. The walls were a stark hospital white with no decorations. The small bed was made with simple sheets, lacking the childish themes Julianne would expect to see in a 7-year-old's room. There were no toys scattered about, only a bookshelf with textbooks organized by subject and a study desk with neatly stacked notebooks. And there, sitting in the chair before the desk, was Louisa. A small, thin girl with brown hair tied in a simple braid. She wore a plain grey dress and had a pair of child-sized crutches beside her chair. The child didn't turn when Julianne entered, continuing to write something in her notebook. "Good morning," Julianne said, unable to contain herself in the face of such a sad scene. Slowly, Louisa turned her head. Her face was pale, with deep dark circles under her large brown eyes. The girl looked at Julianne with an expression that mixed caution and curiosity. "Are you the new housekeeper?" she asked in a low voice, almost a whisper. Julianne hesitated, remembering Deborah's rules, but something in the child's fragility prevented her from ignoring her. "Yes, I'm Julianne. And you're Louisa, right?" The girl nodded, glancing quickly at the door as if fearing someone might hear them. "She told you not to talk to me, didn't she?" The question caught Julianne by surprise. I'm here to clean your room." "It's okay." They all stopped talking to me after a while. Louisa turned back to her notebook. "You can clean. I won't be in the way." That resignation in someone so young broke Julianne's heart. She began to clean the room, noticing that, unlike the other rooms in the house, there were no personal items. No photographs, no toys, no hint of the personality of the child who lived there. It was as if Louisa were just a temporary visitor in that house, not part of the family. When she finished, Julianne couldn't resist. She approached the girl. "What are you studying?" "Math," Louisa answered without looking up. "I have to finish these exercises before lunch or I don't get to eat." Julianne felt a lump in her throat. "You don't go to school?" "I have private tutors, 3 times a week. Louisa finally looked at her. Stepmother Deborah says it's better this way, that I shouldn't bother other children with my limitation. Before Julianne could respond, footsteps were heard in the hallway. Louisa immediately turned her attention back to her notebook, while Julianne quickly went back to wiping the window pane. The door opened and Deborah entered, earlier than expected. Her eyes swept the room, analyzing Julianne's work, before landing on the girl. Louisa, I hope you've finished those exercises. Her tone was icy. Almost done. Stepmother, the girl replied without looking up. Deborah then turned to Julianne. Are you finished in here? There's much more to be done in the rest of the house. Yes, ma'am. I'm just leaving. Good, and remember our rules. Julianne nodded, gathering her cleaning supplies. As she left, she cast one last look at Louisa, who remained with her head bowed, her shoulders tense. There was something deeply wrong with that dynamic, and Julianne could feel it. In the weeks that followed, Julianne observed the household routine. Edward Sinclair, Louisa's father, was always traveling on business. When he was home, Deborah did everything to keep him busy with social engagements, meetings, and dinners, always far from Louisa. The girl, in turn, lived like a ghost in that mansion, always quiet, always alone, always following a strict routine imposed by her stepmother. What Julianne didn't yet know was that her arrival at that house would forever change not only Louisa's life, but also her own, and that fate had placed in her hands the power to unravel a cruel plot that was silently unfolding behind the luxurious walls of the Sinclair mansion. Julianne performed her duties with excellence, but her heart grew heavy each time she entered Louisa's room. After 3 weeks of working in the mansion, she had already noticed a disturbing pattern in the child's treatment. While the entire house breathed luxury, Louisa's room remained austere. While the dining room table was lavishly served, Louisa's plate contained only minimal portions, usually a thin soup or a plain salad. That Wednesday morning, Julianne was cleaning the living room when she heard shouting from the hallway. Deborah's voice echoed off the walls, causing the other staff members to lower their heads and pretend not to hear, as if it were a common occurrence. How many times do I have to repeat myself? You are a worthless girl. Not even your father can stand to be near you. Julianne's blood ran cold. She dropped her duster and walked quickly towards the shouts. In the hallway, she found Deborah gripping Louisa's arm tightly, while the girl, leaning on just one crutch, struggled to keep her balance. He works day and night to support this house, and what does he get in return? A burden like you. A child who can't even walk properly. Louisa's face was streaked with silent tears, her eyes downcast, as if she were already accustomed to this treatment. It was when Deborah raised her hand ready to strike that Julianne acted without thinking. Stop. Her voice came out louder than she intended. Please, Mrs. Sinclair. Deborah spun around, her face contorted with rage, surprised by the interruption. How dare you interfere? Get back to your work immediately. Julianne took a deep breath, knowing she was risking her job but unable to back down. Ma'am, please, the girl is frightened. Perhaps I can help in some way. You weren't hired to help, you were hired to clean, and you're already disobeying my rules. Deborah released Louisa's arm, causing the girl to nearly lose her balance. This conversation isn't over, Louisa. Go back to your room and stay there until I allow you to come out. The girl limped down the hallway, leaning precariously on her single crutch without looking back. When she disappeared behind the blue door, Deborah turned to Julianne, her eyes glinting with restrained fury. In my house, the staff follows my orders. Do you have a problem with that, Julianne? It was a trap, Julianne knew. One wrong word and she would be on the street in an instant. No, ma'am. I apologize for the intrusion. Good that you understand. Now let me make something very clear. Deborah stepped closer, lowering her voice to a threatening whisper. As long as you are in this house, what happens between me and my stepdaughter is none of your business. Louisa needs discipline, and I am the only one who knows how to raise her properly. Understood. Yes, ma'am. Excellent. Now get back to work. And remember, your next interference will be your last. Julianne returned to her tasks, but her mind was in turmoil. What she had witnessed was clearly abuse, not discipline. The way Deborah spoke to the child, the cruel words, the physical intimidation, all of it was unacceptable. But what could she do? She needed this job to survive, and without concrete proof, her word would be worth little, against that of a wealthy and influential woman like Deborah Sinclair. At the end of the day, as she was finishing organizing the kitchen, Julianne overheard Mrs. Matilda, who was supervising the dinner preparations. "You can set aside Miss Louisa's plate. Just vegetable soup, no bread, no dessert. Mrs. Sinclair's orders." The cook, Sonia, a middle-aged woman with a kind expression, sighed as she ladled a minimal portion of soup into a bowl. "This is no meal for a growing child. The girl is already so thin. It's not our place to question," Mrs. Matilda replied, glancing sideways at Julianne, as if to warn her not to comment on the matter. But Julianne needed no more confirmation. During the week she had worked there, she had already noticed how malnourished Louisa looked, with her thin arms and deep dark circles. Now she understood why. That night in her small apartment in the Bronx, Julianne couldn't sleep. The image of Louisa, fragile and resigned in the face of her stepmother's verbal assaults, wouldn't leave her mind. She turned over in bed, thinking of her own difficult childhood, the hardships she had faced but always surrounded by her mother's love. Louisa didn't even have that, a mother figure to protect and love her. "What are you thinking about, Jules?" asked her sister Renee, entering the room they shared. "You've got that worried look on your face." Julianne sat up in bed, hugging her knees. "It's about the house where I'm working. There's a child there, the owner's daughter. She uses crutches and her stepmother treats her horribly." "Horribly how?" Renee sat down beside her sister. "Horribly in a way that makes me want to report it to Child Protective Services. She yells at the girl, humiliates her, practically keeps her a prisoner in her room, barely feeds her." Julianne's voice faltered. "Today I saw her about to hit the child." Renee's eyes widened. "And the father. Doesn't he do anything? He's almost never home. And when he is, the stepmother does everything to keep him away from his daughter. I get the impression he doesn't know what happens when he's away." "This is serious, Jules. You have to do something." "But what?" "If I report it, they'll investigate, sure. But the word of a housekeeper against a rich, respected socialite?" Julianne shook her head. "And what if I lose my job? We're still paying off Mum's medical loan. We can't risk it." Renee took her sister's hand. "I know you're worried about the money, but we're talking about a child being mistreated. If it were you or me in that situation, wouldn't we want someone to help us?" Renee's words hit Julianne hard. She was right. She couldn't just ignore what was happening, regardless of the consequences. "I'll find out more," she decided. "I need to understand the situation better. Maybe find a way to help without losing everything." The next morning, Julianne arrived at the mansion with renewed determination. She performed her tasks with the same efficiency as always, but now she observed every detail, every interaction between Deborah and Louisa, every pattern of the household routine. She discovered that on Thursdays, Deborah spent the entire day out, between the spa, lunches with friends and shopping, only returning at night. That Thursday, as soon as Deborah left, Julianne headed to the kitchen. Sonia was preparing lunch, rigidly following the instructions left by her employer. "Sonia, can I ask you something?" Julianne approached the cook as she chopped vegetables. "Has Louisa always eaten so little?" The woman looked around, making sure Mrs. Matilda wasn't nearby. "Ever since I started working here a year ago, Mrs. Sinclair says that children with disabilities need to eat less so they don't get heavy and make it harder to use their crutches." "But that makes no sense. She needs nutrition to strengthen her muscles, to grow healthy." Sonia nodded sadly. "I know. I've tried making more substantial meals for her, but Mrs. Sinclair inspects everything. Once, when I put more protein on the girl's plate, I lost half my salary as punishment. And the other stuff. Has no one ever questioned it?" "That's what they did at first. Then they either got used to it or were fired." Sonia lowered her voice even more. "The last nanny who tried to interfere left here without references. Mrs. Sinclair spread a rumor to all the agencies that she had stolen jewelry. No one in a private home would hire her after that." Julianne felt a chill. It was clear she was dealing with someone dangerous, someone who wouldn't hesitate to destroy reputations to maintain her control over the house and over Louisa. "Does the girl have friends?" "Visitors?" Julianne asked. "I've never seen another child here. The private tutors come 3 times a week, but they are always supervised by Mrs. Matilda. The girl practically never leaves her room, except for her lessons." That conversation only confirmed Julianne's suspicions. Louisa was being systematically isolated and mistreated. After finishing cleaning the upstairs rooms, Julianne went to the girls' room. She knocked softly on the door. "Louisa, may I come in to clean?" "You can come in," came the quiet reply. Upon opening the door, Julianne found Louisa sitting on the edge of the bed, a book open on her lap. The girl looked up, surprised to see Julianne entering alone, without her cleaning supplies. "Hi," Julianne smiled, closing the door behind her. "How are you today?" Louisa frowned, confused by the question. It was as if no one had been interested in her well-being for a very long time. "I'm fine." Julianne sat beside her on the bed, maintaining a respectful distance. "What are you reading?" "It's a grammar book. I have a test tomorrow." Louisa hesitated. "You shouldn't be talking to me. Stepmother Deborah will be angry. She's out all day. No one needs to know we talked." Julianne looked at the book. "Do you like to read other things besides school books? Stories, maybe?" Louisa's face lit up for a brief moment. "I used to. My mom, my real mom, she read stories to me every night before I went to sleep, about princesses and dragons and adventures. And now, do you have any storybooks?" The light in the girl's face faded. "Stepmother Deborah said they're a waste of time. That girls like me need to focus on studying, because no one will want a disabled wife who isn't at least smart." The cruelty of those words, repeated so matter-of-factly by a 7-year-old child, made Julianne's stomach churn. What kind of person said something like that to a child? "That's not true, Louisa. You know that, don't you?" Julianne tried to keep her voice steady, despite the anger she felt. "You can be whatever you want to be in life. Your leg doesn't define who you are." Louisa looked at Julianne with an expression that mixed hope and suspicion. "Do you really believe that?" "With all my heart." A comfortable silence settled between them. Louisa, slowly, as if testing boundaries, began to talk about her routine, about how she missed going to school, having friends, playing outside. She told her how before her biological mother's death, she had a normal life, attended a regular school and had physical therapy regularly. After Daddy married Deborah, everything changed. First, she said it was better for me to have lessons at home because it would be more comfortable for me. Then that the physical therapy wasn't helping much, and it was better to save the money. And then, Louisa's voice broke, she started saying that I was a burden to everyone, that my dad only got sad when he saw me because I reminded him of my mom. Julianne felt tears welling in her eyes. "And do you see your father often?" "Almost never. He travels a lot, and when he's home, Stepmother Deborah says I'm sleeping or studying, or that I'm not feeling well. Sometimes I hear him arrive, but she never lets him come see me." Louisa wiped a tear with the back of her hand. "I don't think he loves me anymore." It was in that moment that Julianne made her decision. No matter what happened, she would not allow that child to continue suffering. "Louisa, listen to me." Julianne took the girl's small hands in hers. "Your father loves you, I'm sure of it. And what's happening here is not your fault. None of this is your fault. Do you understand?" The girl nodded, tears streaming freely down her pale cheeks. "And I promise you, as long as I'm here, I will do everything I can to help. You're not alone anymore." Julianne knew she was crossing a dangerous line, that she was committing to something that could cost her job and perhaps even more. But looking at that fragile child, so in need of affection and protection, she knew there was no other way. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway made them both jump. Julianne stood up quickly, going to the window. It was Oswald, the driver, returning from an errand. "I have to go," Julianne said, "but I'll be back tomorrow. And remember our secret, okay?" Louisa nodded, a small smile forming on her lips for the first time. Our secret. Julianne left the room with a lighter heart, despite the worry that consumed her. She had taken the first step to change Louisa's situation, but she knew the road ahead would be long and dangerous. Deborah Sinclair was not the type of woman who would easily accept interference. What Julianne didn't know was that her conversation with Louisa would be just the beginning of a battle far greater than she imagined, a battle that would test her limits and forever change the destiny of that family. In the days that followed, Julianne established a secret routine. On Thursdays, when Deborah was out for the day, she would bring Louisa small nutritious snacks that she prepared at home and hid in her bag. At first, the girl hesitated to accept, fearing the consequences if they were discovered. But hunger and the need for affection spoke louder. 3 weeks after their first private conversation, Julianne entered Louisa's room carrying a small insulated bag. "I brought something special today," she announced with a smile, carefully closing the door behind her. "Have you ever tried whole wheat pancakes with banana and honey?" Louisa's eyes widened. "I've never had pancakes." "Never?" Julianne sat beside the girl on the bed, opening the bag. "Then today will be your first time. I made them with healthy ingredients: whole wheat flour, mashed banana, a little bit of honey." As Louisa savored the pancakes, Julianne observed the subtle changes in the child. After a few weeks of proper nutrition, albeit limited to the days they could secretly meet, her cheeks were beginning to gain some color, and a spark of life had returned to her eyes. "Julianne," Louisa called softly after finishing the last bite, "can you tell me a story? One of those princess stories?" The request made Julianne's heart ache. A 7-year-old child asking for a story as if it were the greatest gift in the world. "Of course I can. In fact," she reached into her bag and pulled out a small illustrated book. "I brought this for you. It was mine when I was your age. We'll have to hide it, but when you're alone you can read it." Louisa took the book reverently, running her fingers over the colorful illustrations. "What's it about?" "It's about a very special princess. She's not like other princesses. She uses a magic wand to walk." "A magic wand? Like crutches?" Louisa's voice was full of hope. "Exactly like crutches," Julianne smiled. "And you know what? Her magic wand gives her special powers. She can see things no one else sees, understand things no one else understands." "Like her?" "Yes, like her." Julianne paused. "Actually, people like you have superpowers, you know? You develop strengths that other people can't even imagine having." "What kind of strength?" "Persistence, courage, creativity in solving problems. People who face challenges like yours become stronger, Louisa. And one day you'll realize that your crutch isn't a limitation, but part of who you are, an extraordinary girl." Silent tears streamed down the child's face. Julianne realized it was perhaps the first time someone had spoken about her condition, not as a burden, but as something that made her special in her own way. "And you know what else?" Julianne continued. "I'm going to teach you some English, simple words to start. What do you think?" "Mrs. Sinclair says I'm too stupid to learn other languages. That is absolutely false. You are a brilliant girl." Julianne took a notebook from her bag. "Let's start with something fun. How do you say princesa in English?" "I don't know." "Princess." Julianne wrote the word in the notebook. "And Varinha Magica is magic wand. Repeat after me." For the next hour, Julianne taught Louisa basic English words, which she repeated with growing enthusiasm. It was as if a new world was opening up for her, a world where she was capable, intelligent, and valued. At the end of the impromptu lesson, Louisa looked at Julianne with a serious expression. "Julianne, could you be my mom?" The question took Julianne by surprise, a lump forming in her throat. "Oh, Louisa, sorry." The girl quickly looked down. "That was a silly question." "No, it wasn't silly." Julianne held her hands. "It's an important question, and even though I can't be your official mom, I can be someone who will always take care of you, who will always protect you. Would that work for you?" Louisa nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. "Yes, that would work." That moment of sincere connection was interrupted by the sound of tires in the mansion's driveway. Julianne stood up quickly, gathering the remnants of the snack and hiding the book under Louisa's mattress. "Remember, our secret," she whispered before leaving. Over the following weeks, the relationship between Julianne and Louisa flourished. The housekeeper brought nutritious food whenever possible, told stories, taught English words, and most importantly, showed the child that she was worthy of love and respect. Slowly, Louisa began to gain weight. Her face gained color, and her eyes shone with a renewed life. However, the transformation did not go unnoticed. One Tuesday, as Julianne entered the kitchen to get cleaning supplies, she found Deborah arguing with Sonia, the cook. "How do you explain this, Sonia? The girl is visibly fatter. Have you been ignoring my instructions about her portions?" Deborah's voice was sharp. "No, ma'am. I follow exactly what you determine." Sonia kept her eyes down, her hands trembling. "Then how is she gaining weight?" Children on crutches can't gain weight, it makes it harder to get around. Julianne knew this. Was a ridiculous argument. Louisa's problem was neurological, not muscular, and good nutrition would only help strengthen her body. But she remained silent, pretending to organize cleaning products while she listened. Maybe it's normal, Mom. Children grow... Sonia tried to argue timidly. Don't give me that. Something is wrong here. Deborah slammed her hand on the table. From now on, her meals will be even more controlled. Only vegetable soup, no creaminess, and no fruit for a snack. Sugar encourages inappropriate behavior. Julianne felt her blood boil, but kept her expression neutral. She knew she had to be even more careful, now that Deborah was alert to the changes in Louisa. That night in her apartment, Julianne shared her concerns with her sister. Renee, she's suspicious. I've noticed she's starting to watch my every move in the house. Today, as I was leaving Louisa's room after cleaning, I found Deborah in the hallway as if she were waiting. Maybe it's time to take more concrete action, Jules. Renee looked worried. This girl's situation is serious. This is already mistreatment, it's neglect. Maybe we should contact Child Protective Services. With what proof? It will be the word of a housekeeper against a respected and wealthy socialite. Julianne ran her hands over her face, exhausted. Besides, I'm afraid of what might happen to Louisa, while an investigation is ongoing. Deborah could be even crueler to her, or worse, send her far away. And the father? You haven't managed to speak to him yet. He's rarely home, and when he is, Deborah never leaves him alone. It's like she's standing guard. Julianne hesitated. But I think I found something in her office. Renee's eyes widened. You've been snooping through her things. Julianne, that's dangerous. I had no choice. I needed to understand what's happening. Julianne lowered her voice even though they were alone in the apartment. I found folders with information about boarding schools for children with special needs. One of them is in Switzerland. There were price quotes, partially filled out enrollment forms. My God, she plans to send the girl abroad. Away from her father? It seems so. In one of the printed emails, she mentions that the girl's presence is causing tension in the marriage, and that a more definitive solution would be beneficial for everyone. This is terrible. Jewel, does the girl's father know any of this? Apparently not. From what I understood from the documents, she plans to present the boarding school as a temporary solution for specialized treatment. But the forms I saw talk about permanent residency. Renee was silent for a few moments, processing the information. You need to talk to her father. Somehow you have to get a moment alone with him. I'm trying. I know he'll be home this weekend for a dinner with investors. It's my best chance. The following days were filled with growing tension. Julianne felt Deborah's eyes on her constantly, watching her every move, every interaction. Even so, she continued her secret visits to Louisa's room, now with even more caution. On Thursday, when she entered the girl's room with a hidden sandwich, she found Louisa especially excited. Julianne, Daddy's coming home tomorrow. The girl had a hopeful glint in her eyes. He promised on the phone that he would spend time with me on Saturday. He said he misses me. That's wonderful, Louisa. Julianne smiled, hiding her concern. Knowing Deborah, she would do everything to prevent that meeting. Do you think he'll really see me? Stepmother Deborah always says he's too busy or that I'm sick. If he promised, I'm sure he'll keep his word. Julianne stroked the girl's hair. And you look beautiful, you know. Your cheeks are rosier. Your hair is shiny. Your father will be so happy to see how well you're doing. Louisa smiled shyly. Thanks for yesterday's sandwich. It was delicious. You're welcome, sweetie. Today I brought another one, cheese and turkey. And also, Julianne pulled a small notebook from her bag. I made this English notebook for you, with drawings, words, and little sentences. Louisa hugged the notebook to her chest, her eyes shining. Thank you, Jules. No one has ever done anything like this for me since my mom. An emotional silence fell between them. Julianne hugged the girl, feeling how her body was less fragile, how it was beginning to gain form and strength. Louisa, I need to ask you something. Julianne hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Has your stepmother ever talked about you going to a special school? Maybe in another country? The girl's expression changed immediately. She said that if I keep being disobedient, she'll send me to a place where no one will put up with me, where I'll learn real discipline. She said they won't tolerate a spoiled cripple there. Tears began to form in her eyes. Julianne, I don't want to go away. I don't want to be far from my dad or from you. Julianne's heart tightened. Her suspicions were correct. "Don't worry, Louisa. I won't let that happen. I promise." That promise weighed on Julianne throughout the day. How could she stop Deborah's plans? She needed to find a way to talk to Edward Sinclair before it was too late. The next morning, the mansion was in an uproar with preparations for the business dinner. Julianne was working in the living room when she heard the sound of a car arriving. Through the window, she saw Edward Sinclair get out of a black Mercedes, accompanied by his assistant. He was a tall man, with graying hair at the temples, looking to be about 45. His face showed lines of exhaustion, but there was a dignity in his posture. Deborah appeared at the entrance, perfectly put together in an elegant dress, greeting her husband with a kiss and a rehearsed smile. Julianne watched the interaction carefully, the way Deborah linked her arm in his, guiding him inside, talking incessantly, monopolizing his attention. "Edward, darling, you must be exhausted. Let's go to our room. I've prepared a relaxing bath for you. Then we can discuss the details of tonight's dinner." Deborah's voice was syrupy, completely different from the tone she used when her husband wasn't present. "Actually, I'd like to see Louisa first. I promised her on the phone." Edward tried to head towards the stairs. "Oh, darling, it's not a good time. She's in her physical therapy session, and you know how she gets irritable when she's interrupted. Besides, the therapist said she didn't sleep well last night. She's a bit under the weather." Julianne knew this was a complete lie. Louisa hadn't had physical therapy in months, and that morning she had seen her looking perfectly fine, eagerly awaiting her father's arrival. "I see." Edward seemed disappointed but didn't insist. "Then I'll see her later." Of course. Maybe after dinner if it's not too late." Deborah smiled, leading him away. "Now come, you need to rest before the investors arrive." Julianne finished her task in the living room deep in thought. The dynamic between the couple was exactly as Louisa had described, Deborah manipulating every interaction, pushing father and daughter apart with elaborate excuses. And most worryingly, Edward Sinclair seemed to accept these justifications easily, without question. Upstairs, as she passed Louisa's room to clean, Julianne found the girl sitting by the window, looking sadly out at the garden. "I saw Daddy's car arrive," Louisa said without turning. "But he didn't come to see me." "He wanted to." Julianne closed the door behind her. "I heard him." "But your stepmother said you were in physical therapy." Louisa turned, confused. "Physical therapy? I haven't had physical therapy since last year. Stepmother Deborah said it was too expensive for something that wasn't helping." "I know. It was a lie to stop your father from coming to see you." The realization of what was happening seemed to hit Louisa like a weight. "So that's why. All the times he promises to visit me and doesn't show up." "Exactly." Julianne approached, placing a hand on the girl's shoulder. "Louisa, this can't go on. I need to talk to your father. Tell him what's happening." "Would you help me with that?" How?" The girl's voice was filled with hope. "Your father will be in a meeting in the office before dinner. I know this because I heard Deborah mention it to Mrs. Matilda. If I can get a moment alone with him, I can write a letter." Louisa's spirits lifted. "A letter telling him everything, about how she treats me, about the food, about how she keeps me away from him." "That's a great idea," Julianne smiled. "But we need to be careful. If your stepmother finds out, I don't care anymore." Louisa's face showed a surprising determination for a 7-year-old. "I'm tired of living like this, Julianne. Tired of being scared all the time. I want my dad back." That unexpected courage touched Julianne deeply. "Then let's do it. You write your letter while I finish my tasks. I'll come back before dinner to get it." The plan was set. What Julianne didn't know was that her steps were being watched more closely than she imagined, and that her next move could trigger unexpected consequences for everyone involved. As the mansion prepared for the business dinner, Julianne performed her tasks with mechanical precision, but her mind was entirely focused on the plan. Louisa's words echoed in her head. "I'm tired of being scared all the time," in that phrase, coming from a child of just 7, carried a pain that no one that age should ever know. Around 5 in the afternoon, as the activity in the house intensified with the arrival of the first caterers for the event, Julianne took advantage of a moment of general distraction and went to Louisa's. Room. She knocked softly on the door, looking around to make sure she wasn't being watched. "Louisa?" "It's me," she whispered. The door opened, revealing the girl with a determined expression on her face, holding a white envelope. "I finished the letter, Julianne. May I read it?" "Yes." Louisa handed her the envelope. "I wrote everything. About how she treats me, about the foods I can't eat, about being locked in my room, about the things she says, that I'm a burden, that no one will want to cripple, that my father is ashamed of me." Julianne took the letter from the envelope, her eyes quickly scanning the words written in a childish yet clear hand. The sincerity and pain stamped on those lines were heartbreaking. Louisa not only reported the mistreatment and neglect, but also expressed how much she missed her father, her desire to be loved, her confusion as to why she deserved to be treated that way. "It's perfect." "Louisa." Julianne folded the letter carefully, returning it to the envelope. "I'll make sure your father reads this tonight. You promise?" The girl's eyes shone with a mixture of hope and fear. "I promise. And remember, no matter what happens, you are not alone. I'm here for you." Julianne hugged the child, feeling her tremble slightly. It was a risky bet, but a necessary one. If the plan worked, Edward Sinclair would finally see the truth about his wife and the treatment of his daughter. If it failed, Julianne didn't even want to think about the consequences. "Now I have to go. Stay calm and act normally if your stepmother comes to check on you." Upon leaving Louisa's room, Julianne tucked the letter into her uniform pocket and headed for the kitchen, where the chef hired for the event and his assistants were working frantically. Mrs. Matilda was coordinating everything with military efficiency, checking every detail. "Julianne, thank goodness I found you." The housekeeper seemed relieved. "I need you to finish preparing the bath towels for the overnight guests. Mrs. Sinclair wants the new Egyptian cotton towels, the ones scented with lavender." "Yes, ma'am. I'll get right on it." The extra task was a complication, but also an opportunity. The towels were stored in a closet near Edward's office, which would give Julianne a perfect excuse to be in that area of the house during the meeting. At 6:30, while sorting the towels as requested, Julianne saw Edward Sinclair enter his office, followed by two men in suits. From what she overheard from the staff, it was a pre-dinner meeting to discuss the details of a major investment. Julianne waited patiently, organizing the towels with deliberate slowness. 20 minutes later, the two executives left the office, heading to the living room where cocktails were being served. It was her chance. Edward was alone. With her heart racing, Julianne approached the half-open office door. Edward had his back to the entrance, looking out the panoramic window at the illuminated gardens, a glass of whiskey in his hand. There was something solitary about his figure, a melancholy that contrasted with the image of the successful businessman. Julianne knocked softly on the door. "Excuse me, sir." Edward turned, surprised. "Yes, pardon the intrusion. I'm Julianne. I've been working here for a few months." She kept her voice steady despite her nervousness. "I need to give you something. Something important. If it's about the house, please speak with my wife or the housekeeper." "It's not about the house." "Sir?" Julianne took a step forward, pulling the envelope from her pocket. "It's about your daughter, Louisa." The mention of his daughter caused an immediate change in Edward's expression. A mix of concern and guilt flickered in his eyes. "Has something happened to her?" "Not exactly, but—" Julianne hesitated, searching for the right words. "Louisa wrote this letter for you. She would very much like you to read it." Edward placed his glass on the desk and reached for the envelope. "A letter?" "Yes, about what her life has been like when you're not home." Something in Julianne's voice must have alerted Edward to the gravity of the situation as his expression grew serious while he opened the envelope. As his eyes moved over his daughter's words, his face changed, surprise, confusion, then a growing indignation. This can't be true." His voice was low, almost a whisper. "Deborah wouldn't be capable—" "It's all true, sir." Julianne felt a sudden courage. "Your daughter is kept practically as a prisoner in that part of the house. She's fed minimal portions because your wife says children on crutches can't be heavy. She has no access to toys, children's books, or anything that brings her joy. And worst of all, she is constantly humiliated, called a useless cripple, a burden, a shame." Edward looked up from the letter, shock etched on his face. "Why has Louisa never told me any of this?" Because she rarely sees you, sir. Whenever you're home, your wife makes excuses. She says Louisa is sleeping, studying, unwell in physical therapy. Just today you wanted to see your daughter, and were told she was in a physical therapy session, weren't you? Yes, Deborah told me that. Your daughter hasn't had physical therapy in over a year. Your wife cancelled the sessions, saying they were a waste of money. Edward staggered slightly, leaning on the desk as if Julianne's words had physical weight. How do you know all this? I've been observing what happens in this house for months, sir. I've been helping Louisa secretly, bringing her proper food when I can, giving her a little attention and affection. She is a wonderful, intelligent, and brave child who has been treated like an unwanted burden. A heavy silence fell over the office as Edward absorbed the information. He reread the letter, ran a hand through his hair, his face a mask of growing anguish. Why are you telling me this now? Why risk it? Because I discovered that your wife plans to send Louisa to a boarding school in Switzerland. Julianne took a deep breath. A permanent one, from which she would likely never return. I found documents in her office, enrollment forms, emails discussing the permanent solution to the problem that Louisa represents. That's absurd. Edward's voice rose. She would never make a decision like that without consulting me. Louisa is my daughter. With all due respect, sir, you haven't noticed everything that's already happening under your own roof. Your wife is extremely manipulative. She has already destroyed the reputations of staff who tried to interfere, spreads lies, creates situations to keep you and your daughter apart. Edward seemed to be struggling internally with the information. Julianne understood his resistance. It was difficult to accept that the person he had married, the person he trusted, was capable of such cruelty. I need to see my daughter. Edward folded the letter, placing it in the inner pocket of his jacket. Right now. Sir, if I may suggest, Julianne spoke quickly, your wife will be looking for you for dinner. If you disappear, she'll become suspicious. Perhaps it's better to wait for the right moment, when you can talk without interruption. Edward considered the advice for a moment. You're right. Tonight's dinner is crucial for the company. I can't just disappear. He looked directly at Julianne. But I want your word that Louisa is safe for now. She is, sir. I've been looking after her as best I can. Tomorrow morning, before anyone else is awake, I will go to her room. We need to talk. That would be the best time. Julianne felt a cautious relief. Edward seemed genuinely concerned, willing to investigate the situation. It was a first step. Julianne, Edward hesitated. Thank you for taking care of my daughter when I failed her. It's not too late to fix things. Sir. A light knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Mrs. Matilda appeared, looking slightly anxious. Excuse me, sir, Mrs. Sinclair is looking for you. The first guests have arrived. Her eyes landed on Julianne with an inquisitive expression. I'm on my way, Matilda. Edward hesitated. Julianne was just asking me about the towels for the guest rooms. I see, sir. Matilda's tone suggested she didn't quite believe him. Julianne, Mrs. Sinclair needs you to finish arranging the towels and then help with drinks in the living room. Yes, ma'am. I'm going now. When Matilda left, Edward looked at Julianne one last time. This conversation isn't over. Tomorrow I will resolve all of this. Yes, sir. Julianne left the office with a contradictory feeling of relief and apprehension. The first part of the plan had worked. Edward now knew the truth, or at least part of it. But the real test was yet to come, confronting Deborah, breaking the cycle of manipulation she had established, and rebuilding the relationship between father and daughter. As she finished arranging the towels, Julianne noticed her hands were shaking. She had crossed a line from which there was no return. Her position in the house was definitely compromised, regardless of the outcome. But when she thought of Louisa's hopeful little face, she knew she had made the right choice. The evening wore on, and the business dinner was in full swing. From the kitchen, where she was helping prepare dessert trays, Julianne could hear the murmur of conversations from the dining room, occasionally punctuated by polite laughter. Deborah, from what she could see in her brief trips to serve the guests, was absolutely radiant, playing the role of the sophisticated hostess and devoted wife to perfection. Edward, on the other hand, seemed distant, participating in conversations out of obligation, his gaze occasionally drifting into space. Only Julianne understood the turmoil that must have been raging inside him, after reading Louisa's letter. Around 10 o'clock, as the dinner began to wind down, Julianne took advantage of a quiet moment in the kitchen to quickly go up to Louisa's room. She wanted to reassure the girl, to tell her that the letter had been delivered and that her father was concerned. As she approached the blue door, however, she sensed something was wrong. The door, usually closed, was ajar, and a faint light emanated from within. Cautiously, Julianne pushed it open slightly, peeking inside. The room was empty. Louisa's bed was made, her notebook stacked on the desk as always, but there was no sign of the girl. The crutches, which normally stood propped near the bed, were also gone. A chill ran down Julianne's spine. Where could Louisa be at this hour? In the bathroom, perhaps? But the door to the adjoining bathroom was open. Revealing it was also empty. It was then that Julianne noticed something on the study desk, a folded piece of paper with her name written on the front, in Louisa's childish handwriting. With her heart pounding, she picked up the note and read, "Dear Julianne, stepmother Deborah found our letter. She was very angry. She said you will be fired, and that I am going to the boarding school tomorrow. She said my father has already agreed to everything. I am very scared, Louisa." Julianne's blood ran cold in her veins. How had Deborah found out? Perhaps Matilda had reported their conversation in the office, or maybe Edward had confronted his wife prematurely. It didn't matter now. What was crucial was finding Louisa, making sure she was safe. Julianne hurried out of the room, her mind racing through the possibilities. Where could Deborah have taken the girl? She couldn't ask anyone directly. That would only alert Deborah. She needed to search discreetly, taking advantage of the dinner's confusion. She checked the other rooms on the floor, the library, the study rooms. Nothing. She went down to the first floor, avoiding the areas where the guests were gathered. She checked the TV room, the sunroom, even the larger closets. No sign of Louisa. The anguish in her chest grew. What if Deborah had taken Louisa out of the house, taken her somewhere else to prevent any contact with Edward? It was as she passed through the kitchen, trying not to draw attention, that she heard a whisper. Sonia, the cook, was calling her discreetly from behind the pantry door. "Julianne, come quick." Looking around to make sure she wasn't being watched, Julianne slipped into the pantry. Sonia closed the door behind them. "I'm looking for Louisa," Julianne said immediately. "Have you seen her?" "Yes, Mrs. Sinclair took her to the guest house at the back of the property." Sonia's expression was grave. "I heard her tell the driver to prepare the car for early tomorrow morning. Something about taking the girl to the airport." My God, Julianne felt panic rising. She's going to try to get Louisa out of the country before Edward can interfere. There's more. Sonia lowered her voice even further. "Matilda told Deborah about your conversation with Mr. Edward in the office. The mistress is furious, saying you manipulated the girl against her, that you invented stories to harm her." "That's absurd. I have proof. I saw the documents about the boarding school. I witnessed the mistreatment. She says you entered her office without permission, that you stole documents, that you're obsessively attached to the girl, trying to take the mother's place." Sonia gripped Julianne's arm. "She's painting you as unstable, Julianne, and she's already convinced some of the staff." The gravity of the situation fell on Julianne like a weight. Deborah was ahead of the game, manipulating the narrative, isolating Louisa, possibly preparing to take her out of the country before Edward could intervene. And now she was turning Julianne into the villain of the story. "I need to talk to Mr. Edward right now." Impossible. He's surrounded by investors, and Deborah won't leave his side. Sonia hesitated. "But I have an idea. The dinner should end in an hour. The guests who aren't staying overnight will leave, and the others will go up to their rooms. That will be your chance to talk to him. And until then, Louisa is alone in that guest house." She's scared, Sonia. "Oswald is on guard there. Explicit orders from Deborah, no one in nor out." Julianne thought quickly. "Could you distract Oswald for a few minutes? Maybe call him to the kitchen to get something?" Sonia considered the proposal for a moment. "I can try. He always comes when I need help carrying something heavy." "Perfect. I'll head over as soon as you call him. I need to at least reassure Louisa. Tell her I'm working to fix the situation." The two women quickly arranged the details. Julianne would return to the living room, continuing to serve the guests as if nothing had happened, while Sonia prepared the distraction for Oswald. As she left the pantry, Julianne ran into Matilda in the hallway. The housekeeper looked at her with an unreadable expression. "Mrs. Sinclair wants to see you in the dining room. Now." Julianne's heart leaped into her throat. It was a summons she couldn't ignore without arousing more suspicion. With a nod, she followed Matilda, knowing she was about to face the woman who was now her declared enemy, and who held all the power in that house. Julianne walked down the hallway following Matilda, each step echoing like a countdown to the inevitable confrontation. The dining room was already empty, the guests having moved to the living room for coffee and liqueurs. Only Deborah remained, standing by the window, a glass of red wine in her hand. When the door closed behind Julianne, the mistress turned slowly, her face a mask of studied calm that barely concealed the fury beneath. "Julianne," Deborah pronounced the name as if it were an unpleasant foreign word. "You have been a great disappointment." Julianne stood tall, determined not to show fear. "Mrs. Sinclair, when I hired you, I made my rules perfectly clear, especially the main one. Do not get involved with my stepdaughter." Deborah took a sip of wine, her eyes never leaving Julianne's face. "However, I have discovered that you not only disobeyed that order, but also manipulated a vulnerable child against me and broke into my office to steal confidential documents." "I didn't manipulate anyone, ma'am. I only helped a child who is being neglected and emotionally abused in her own home." A cold smile formed on Deborah's face. "Impressive. You really believe that, don't you? That you're some kind of savior? That you know more about raising a child with special needs than her own family?" "I know the difference between discipline and cruelty." Julianne took a step forward. "I know that no child should be deprived of proper food, affection, or contact with her own father. I know that no one should be told they are a burden, a shame, an unwanted weight." "How touching." Deborah placed her glass on the table. "Unfortunately for you, it doesn't matter what you think. This is my house and Louisa is my responsibility. And you—" she paused theatrically. "You are fired, effective immediately. I want you to gather your things and be off my property in 15 minutes. Julianne's heart pounded, but she kept her voice firm. "I can't do that, Mrs. Sinclair. Not without speaking to Mr. Edward about Louisa's situation." Deborah's expression hardened. "My husband is busy with important matters, not with the fantasies of an unstable housekeeper. Besides, he is already aware of the situation, your pathetic attempt to involve him using a manipulated letter. The letter was written by Louisa. Every word came from her. A 7-year-old child? Please?" Deborah laughed, a humorless sound. "Edward knows my dedication to this family. He knows how much I sacrifice to maintain this home, to ensure his daughter has everything she needs, despite her limitations." Julianne took a deep breath, maintaining her composure. "If that's the case, why did you hide the plans to send Louisa to a boarding school in Switzerland? Why do you constantly prevent father and daughter from seeing each other?" Something flickered in Deborah's eyes, a flash of surprise, perhaps concern. But her expression quickly returned to its mask of perfect control. "You understand nothing about our family or our decisions. The boarding school is an option we are considering for Louisa's own good. A specialized institution that can offer what she needs. Top-tier medical treatment, an adapted education, socialization with other children like her. Strange that, in the documents I saw, the word permanent appeared so frequently." Julianne kept her gaze fixed on Deborah. "And even stranger that your husband seemed completely surprised by this option when I mentioned it." A tense silence fell between them. Deborah seemed to be recalculating her approach. "I'll be direct, Julianne." Her voice dropped to an almost confidential tone. "I know you've grown attached to Louisa. I understand to some extent. You're young, perhaps you dream of a family of your own one day. But that doesn't give you the right to interfere in matters that don't concern you. The well-being of a child concerns any decent person." "Noble, truly noble." Deborah stepped closer, until she was just a few feet from Julianne. "But think carefully about what you're doing. You're risking your career, your reputation, perhaps even more. Why, for a girl you barely know? Because it's the right thing to do." "The right thing?" Deborah laughed again. "Let me show you something." She walked to the small handbag resting on the dining table, took out a phone, and after a few taps on the screen, held it out to Julianne. "Watch this." On the screen, a video began to play. It was a recording from Louisa's room, clearly made by a hidden camera. It showed Julianne sitting beside the girl on the bed, talking to her. The audio had been edited, distorted, so that phrases like "you can trust me" and "your stepmother doesn't need to know" sounded sinister. Out of context, security cameras, Deborah explained with a victorious smile, installed after a few items went missing from the house. Useful, aren't they? Julianne handed back the phone, a heavy feeling in her stomach. This is blatant manipulation. The audio has been edited, is it? And who would believe you over me? A housekeeper of 3 months versus a respected businesswoman and philanthropist? Deborah put the phone away. I have other recordings too. Edited or not, as you prefer to believe, they paint a rather disturbing picture. A domestic worker obsessed with her employer's daughter, secretly feeding her against medical advice, filling the child's head with stories, creating an inappropriate bond. Julianne felt her blood run cold. You have no scruples. I have priorities, which is different. Deborah returned to her glass of wine. Now let's get to the point. You have 2 options. Leave now quietly and discreetly, receive an extra week's pay as severance and get on with your life. Or, she paused dramatically, insist on this ridiculous crusade and face not only termination for cause, but also a lawsuit for invasion of privacy, attempted parental alienation, and who knows, maybe even for improper conduct with a minor. I have friends in the police, in the judiciary, in the press. Can you imagine what your life would be like after that? The threat hung in the air like a poison. Julianne knew it wasn't a bluff. Deborah had the resources and the contacts to destroy her reputation, to turn her from a savior into a villain. Why are you doing this? Julianne finally asked. Why so much hatred for an innocent child? Something changed in Deborah's gaze. A flicker of vulnerability quickly replaced by coldness. I don't hate Louisa. I just recognize what she represents, a constant ghost of Edward's past, a living reminder of a love he lost. As long as she is here, I will never be the only one in his heart. The confession, raw in its honesty, shocked Julianne. So all this suffering is because of jealousy? Of a child? It's for the survival of my marriage. Deborah drank the last of her wine. You wouldn't understand. You've never fallen in love with someone who carries the ghost of another love, and you think making Edward lose his daughter too will bring him closer to you. Or will it just destroy him completely? The question seemed to hit Deborah in an unexpected way. For a brief moment, hesitation crossed her face, but she quickly composed herself. I've wasted enough time on you. Your decision, leave in silence or face the consequences. Julianne looked directly into Deborah's eyes. She had only one card left to play. Before I decide, I would like to at least say goodbye to Louisa. She's already lost too many people in her life without an explanation. Deborah considered the request, obviously looking for a trap. You really do care about her, don't you? Pathetic. It's what makes us human, Mrs. Sinclair, compassion. 5 minutes. Deborah checked her watch. And supervised by Oswald. After that, I want you out of my sight. It was enough. All Julianne needed was to check that Louisa was okay, reassure her, and most importantly, buy time until she could speak with Edward. Thank you. Don't thank me. I'm just avoiding unnecessary drama. Deborah picked up her phone and made a quick call. Oswald, take Julianne to the guest house to say goodbye to the girl. 5 minutes, not a second more, and keep an eye on her the whole time. Hanging up, Deborah shot one last cold glare at Julianne. Go pack your things after you say goodbye. Don't make me send someone to get you. Julianne left the dining room with a mix of relief and apprehension. The conversation had been even worse than she'd imagined. Deborah had not only confessed her true motives, but had also demonstrated how far she was willing to go to protect them. The manipulated recordings, the veiled threats, it all pointed to a woman who was dangerous in her determination. Oswald was already waiting for her at the back door, his face impassive. He was a man of few words, loyal to his employer. Julianne followed him in silence across the garden, lit by small lamps towards the guest house situated about 100 yards from the main residence. The girl is awake, Oswald said as they walked. She seemed scared. Thank you for telling me. Julianne looked at the driver, trying to gauge if he could be an ally. Oswald, you've worked for the family for a long time, haven't you? 5 years. Since before Mrs. Sinclair. So you knew Louisa's mother? A brief flicker of emotion crossed the driver's face. Mrs. Clara, yes, I knew her. An extraordinary woman. And what was Louisa like back then? Oswald hesitated, as if the question had caught him off guard. She was a happy child, despite her condition. Always laughing, playing in the garden. Mrs. Clara made a point of taking her everywhere, school, parks, friends' parties. She said the disability would not define her daughter's life. That sounds very different from the Louisa of today. Oswald looked at Julianne, a visible conflict in his eyes. I shouldn't be talking about this. Just 5 minutes with her, Oswald. That's all I ask. They reached the guest house, a smaller but equally elegant building. Oswald opened the door, leading Julianne to a living room where Louisa was sitting on a sofa, hugging a cushion, her eyes red from crying. "Julianne!" the girl exclaimed upon seeing her, trying to stand up but without her crutches nearby. "Hey, easy." Julianne ran to her, hugging her. "I'm here. Stepmother Deborah said you were leaving forever, that you had made up lies about her, that you wanted to take me away." The words came out in a desperate torrent. "She got so mad when she found the letter. She broke my crutches." "What?" Julianne looked around, noticing the crutches were indeed nowhere in sight. "Where are your crutches, Louisa?" "She broke them," the girl sobbed. "She said that way I couldn't try to run away. And she said that early tomorrow we're going to a place far away, where I won't bother anyone anymore. That my dad has already agreed to everything." Julianne felt a rage she had never experienced before. Breaking a paralyzed child's crutches was an act of calculated cruelty, a way to completely immobilize her, to make her even more vulnerable and dependent. That's not going to happen. "Louisa!" Julianne held the girl's face in her hands. "I'm working to fix everything. Your father read your letter. He knows the truth now." "Really? He believed me?" "He did. And he's just as worried as I am." Julianne glanced at Oswald, who remained at the door, watching the scene with an unreadable expression. "You need to be strong just a little longer, okay? Don't believe what your stepmother says. Your father loves you and he won't let anything bad happen to you." Louisa hugged Julianne tightly. "I'm scared, Jules. I don't want to go far away. I don't want to be without you and Daddy." "That's not going to happen." "I promise." Julianne looked at Oswald again. "How much time do I have left?" 2 minutes. Julianne lowered her voice, speaking into Louisa's ear. "I need you to be brave. I'm going to talk to your father tonight, but it might take a while before we can get you out of here. If your stepmother comes, pretend you believe her, that you're sorry, anything to buy time. Understand?" Louisa nodded, wiping her tears. "I'll try." "Good girl." Julianne kissed her forehead. "And remember, like the princess in the book, you have superpowers. You're stronger than you think." "Time's up," Oswald announced from the door. Julianne hugged Louisa one last time. "I'll be back soon." "I promise." As she left the guest house, Julianne noticed that Oswald was watching her with a different expression, something like reluctant respect. "Mrs. Sinclair has ordered you to pack your things and leave immediately," he said, leading her back to the mansion. "Your bag is already in the staff room." "Oswald," Julianne hesitated, then decided to take a chance. "You see what she's doing to Louisa. You know it's not right." The driver kept his gaze fixed ahead. "I don't get involved in family matters. She broke a child's crutches, Oswald. She's planning to take her out of the country without her father's knowledge. This goes beyond family matters." Oswald remained silent for a few steps, then spoke quietly. "Mr. Edward will be in the library after dinner. He always goes there for a cigar when the guests retire." Julianne's heart raced. It was the information she needed, a chance to speak with Edward without Deborah's interference. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what you're talking about." Oswald's face remained impassive. "I was just commenting on the boss's routine." As they entered the mansion through the service door, they could hear the gathering in the living room beginning to disperse. Some guests were already saying their goodbyes, while others who were staying overnight were being shown to their rooms. "Go pack your things," Oswald said in a normal voice as they entered. "I have orders to take you to the bus stop as soon as you're ready." "I understand." Julianne went to the small staff room where she kept her belongings. Her bag was on the bed, as Oswald had said. She made a show of organizing her things, taking as much time as possible. She needed to wait for the guests to retire, for Deborah to be distracted, for Edward to go to the library. Deborah's strategy was clear now. Get Julianne out of the house before she could speak with Edward again, and then accelerate the plans to send Louisa to the boarding school. She probably already had a convincing story prepared to explain why the housekeeper had been fired and why Louisa's sudden international placement was necessary. But Julianne had discovered a chink in Deborah's perfect armor, Oswald, the loyal driver who, apparently, still held respect for the memory of Edward's first wife and for the happiness Louisa had known in those times. The clock on the wall read 11:10 p.m. when Julianne finally finished packing her bag. Theoretically, she should call Oswald and leave the mansion. Instead, she peeked down the hallway. The staff wing was quiet, most having already retired after the long day's work. Upstairs, she could hear the movement subsiding as guests settled into their rooms. It was time to act. With her heart pounding, Julianne headed for the library, taking care to use the less frequented corridors of the mansion. She had only one chance to speak with Edward before Deborah noticed her absence, and on that conversation rested all hope of saving Louisa. The Sinclair Mansion's library was located in the far west wing of the first floor, an imposing room lined with dark wood paneling and shelves that stretched from floor to ceiling, housing rare volumes and first editions that Edward collected with a passion. A wrought-iron spiral staircase led to a mezzanine where the most valuable works were kept, and large windows overlooked the back garden, and now plunged into the darkness of night. Julianne approached cautiously, her heart hammering against her ribs. The hallway leading to the library was dim, lit only by soft sconces fixed to the walls at regular intervals. When she reached the carved oak door, she hesitated. What if Edward wasn't alone? What if Deborah was with him? Her direct confrontation now would ruin any chance of helping Louisa. Taking a deep breath, she pressed her ear against the polished wood. Silence, except for the faint rustle of pages being turned and the occasional clink of ice in a whiskey glass. Mustering her courage, she knocked softly. "Come in," came Edward's deep voice. Julianne opened the door slowly, slipping into the library and closing it silently behind her. Edward was sitting in a leather armchair near the unlit fireplace, an open book on his lap, and a glass of whiskey on the side table. The scent of a cigar hung in the air. Upon seeing her, his eyes widened slightly. "Julianne, I thought you were Matilda." He closed the book, marking his page with a finger. "My wife informed me that you were fired." "I was, sir." Julianne took a few steps toward him. "But I couldn't leave without finishing our conversation. The situation is more serious than I imagined." Edward gestured to the opposite armchair. "Sit down." Julianne accepted the invitation, perching on the edge of the chair, tense. "Mr. Sinclair, your wife is planning to take Louisa out of the country early tomorrow morning, to that boarding school in Switzerland I mentioned." "How do you know this?" Edward's expression turned grave. "Louisa told me. After discovering the letter your daughter wrote to you, your wife was furious. She took Louisa to the guest house at the back of the property and—" Julianne hesitated, searching for the right words. "Sir, she broke your daughter's crutches to prevent her from moving on her own." Edward stood up abruptly, the book falling to the floor. "What are you saying?" "That's absurd." "I saw it myself, sir. I went to say goodbye to Louisa, and she was there without her crutches. Your daughter is terrified, believing she'll be sent away tomorrow, that she'll never see you again." Edward walked to the window, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of profound distress. "Deborah told me you were making up stories, that you had become obsessively attached to Louisa, that you were trying to manipulate her against us." "And you believed that?" Julianne couldn't hide the disbelief in her voice. "I don't know what to believe." Edward turned to face her. "I've known my wife for 3 years. She has always seemed dedicated to creating a stable home for all of us, despite the difficulties." "What difficulties, sir?" "Your daughter's disability?" Edward looked away. "Not just that. After Clara's death, I wasn't the father I should have been. The pain was unbearable. Louisa looked so much like her mother. The same eyes, the same smile. Looking at her was like losing Clara all over again every day. So you pulled away?" "Yes." The confession seemed to cause him physical pain. "I buried myself in work, in travel. Deborah took on the responsibility that was mine, taking care of Louisa, managing the house, keeping everything running while I fled from reality." Julianne stood up, approaching cautiously. "Mr. Sinclair, I understand your pain. I lost my own mother recently. I know how grief can paralyze us. But your daughter is suffering, not just from her father's absence, but from real, daily abuse at the hands of someone who should be protecting her. Edward remained silent for long moments, as if fighting an internal battle. When he spoke again, his voice was heavy with restrained emotion. If what you're saying is true, if Deborah really mistreated my daughter, hid it from me, planned to send her away without my real consent, he clenched his fists. That is unforgivable. I have no reason to lie, sir. I risked my job, my reputation, to protect Louisa. All I ask is that you go to her now, see with your own eyes, listen to what she has to say. The guest house, you said? Yes, Oswald is on guard. Edward walked decisively to the door, but stopped with his hand on the knob. Why are you doing this, Julianne? Why risk so much for a child you barely know? The question took Julianne by surprise. It was almost identical to the one Deborah had asked. But while on Deborah's lips it had sounded like an accusation, coming from Edward it seemed like a genuine attempt to understand. Because no one deserves to grow up believing they are a burden, sir. No child should feel that their existence is an inconvenience to those who should love them unconditionally. Julianne paused, feeling emotion rise in her throat. My mother taught me that when we witness an injustice and do nothing, we become accomplices. I cannot be an accomplice to Louisa's suffering. Edward nodded slowly, a new respect visible in his eyes. Let's go to my daughter. Together they left the library. Edward led the way through the silent corridors of the sleeping mansion, his posture erect, his steps determined. Julianne followed close behind, watchful, aware that Deborah could appear at any moment. As they passed through the living room, now empty, except for staff clearing the last remnants of the dinner, Edward took a coat hanging from the coat rack near the back door. It's cold out, he said, offering it to Julianne. The simple gesture of consideration caught Julianne off guard. It was the first time Edward had treated her not as an employee, but as an ally. When they stepped out into the garden, the cool night air enveloped them. The guest house was about 100 yards away, its lit windows standing out in the darkness. They walked in silence, each step bringing them closer to the truth that would forever change the destiny of that family. Oswald was standing at the entrance to the guest house, erect and vigilant. Upon seeing Edward approach, he gave a slight bow. Sir? Where is my daughter? Edward's voice allowed no evasion. In the back room, sir. Mrs. Sinclair gave express orders that no one— I am her father, Oswald, and the owner of this house. The tone was firm but not aggressive. Open the door, please. The driver hesitated for only a second before complying. As he opened the door, his eyes met Julianne's in a brief, silent acknowledgement. Edward entered first, followed by Julianne. The guest house, though luxurious, was significantly smaller than the main mansion, an elegant living room, a small kitchen, 2 bedrooms and bathrooms. Louisa, Edward called, his voice softer now. A small sound came from the back room. Edward crossed the living room quickly, opening the door. Louisa was sitting on the bed, hugging a cushion, her eyes red from crying. Upon seeing her father, her face lit up with a mixture of surprise and hope. Daddy! Edward froze for a moment, as if seeing his daughter for the first time in years. Then in 3 long strides he was beside the bed, kneeling and taking Louisa into his arms. My daughter, my little one, his voice broke. Forgive me for not being here for you. Louisa clung to her father, sobbing against his shoulder. You came. You really came. Julianne watched from the doorway, silent tears streaming down her face. There was something profoundly sacred in that moment of reconnection, in that father finally seeing the daughter he had avoided for so long. Where are your crutches, Louisa? Edward asked, pulling back just enough to look into his daughter's eyes. Stepmother Deborah broke them. The girl swallowed a sob. She said that way I couldn't run away before we went to Switzerland tomorrow. Edward's face hardened, a controlled fury taking over his features. You are not going anywhere, my princess. I will never let anyone hurt you again. Promise? Louisa's small voice was laden with hope and fear. I promise. Edward kissed her forehead. Now tell me everything. Everything that happened while I was away. For the next few minutes, Louisa, her courage renewed by her father's presence, recounted the years of emotional abuse, the humiliations, the isolation, the denied meals, the cruel words. She spoke of how she was constantly reminded that she was a burden to everyone, how she was told her father worked so hard to escape the shame of having a defective daughter. With each revelation, Edward's face grew paler, his eyes darker with a contained rage. When Louisa finished, he remained silent for several moments, as if processing the enormity of what he had allowed to happen under his own roof. "How could I have been so blind?" he finally murmured, more to himself than to the others in the room. "How could I have failed you so completely, my daughter?" "You're here now, Daddy." Louisa touched her father's face with her small hand. "That's what matters." The wisdom of that child, who had endured so much yet still retained the capacity to forgive, struck Julianne deeply. Despite everything, Louisa had not lost her essence, her purity of heart, her ability to love. "We need to get her out of here," Julianne said, finally stepping into the room. "If your wife finds out we're here—" Edward nodded, regaining his determination. "You're right. I'm taking Louisa to the mansion, to my room. After that—" his face hardened. "After that, I will have a definitive conversation with my wife." "Sir," Oswald appeared at the door, his face tense. "Mrs. Sinclair has just left the main house. She's coming this way." Julianne's heart leaped. There wouldn't be time to escape without being seen. "I'll delay her," Oswald offered, surprising everyone. "I'll say I was checking the car for tomorrow, as she ordered. I'll buy you a few minutes." "Thank you, Oswald." Edward stood up, lifting Louisa into his arms. "Julianne, there's a back door that leads to the conservatory. From there we can enter the mansion through the kitchen without being seen from the main entrance." Oswald left quickly, while Edward, with Louisa in his arms, headed for the back door, Julianne close behind. The girl clung to her father's neck, her small face tense with fear. "It's going to be okay, Princess," Edward murmured. "Daddy's here now." They slipped out into the dark garden, circling the guest house on the side opposite the main path. In the distance, they could hear Deborah's voice, her tone impatient as she spoke with Oswald. Edward quickened his pace, shielding Louisa from the night air with his own coat. The conservatory was an elegant structure of glass and metal, where tropical plants and exotic flowers were grown even during the coldest months. They entered silently, crossing the fragrant space to the door that connected the conservatory to the mansion's kitchen. The kitchen was empty at this hour, the clean surfaces gleaming under the dim light left on over the stove. Edward led them through the room to the service corridor, then up a side staircase rarely used by the residents, but which led directly to the upper floor, where the main bedrooms were located. "Almost there," he whispered to Louisa, who remained quiet in his arms, her large eyes watching every move. When they reached the main bedroom corridor, Edward went directly to the master suite. He opened the door carefully and entered, placing Louisa gently on the large bed. "You'll stay here tonight with me," he said, stroking his daughter's hair. "No one is taking you anywhere." Louisa looked around, clearly uncomfortable to be in the room her father shared with Deborah. "What about stepmother Deborah?" "Don't worry about her." Edward's voice was firm. "From today on, things are going to be very different in this house." Julianne remained near the door, unsure of her role now that father and daughter were reunited. Edward noticed her discomfort and turned to her. "Julianne, I have no words to express my gratitude. You did what I should have done a long time ago. You protected my daughter, showed her she is loved and valued. Any decent person would have done the same, sir." "No." Edward shook his head. "Many saw what was happening and chose to look the other way. You risked everything for a child you barely knew." He hesitated. "I know you were fired, but I would like to ask you to reconsider. Louisa needs you. I need your help to fix all the harm that has been done." Before Julianne could answer, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed in the hallway. The suite door burst open, revealing Deborah, her face a mask of contained fury. "What is going on here?" Her voice was controlled, but her eyes burned at the sight of Louisa on the bed and Julianne still in the house. "Edward, explain yourself." Edward rose slowly, positioning himself between his wife and the bed where Louisa lay. When he spoke, his voice was low but charged with an authority Julianne had never witnessed before. "It's over, Deborah. I know everything." "Everything what exactly?" Deborah tried to maintain her composure, but a slight tremor in her hands betrayed her nervousness. "If you're referring to the lies this housekeeper has been spreading, they are not lies." Edward took a step forward. "I've seen it with my own eyes. I've heard it from my own daughter's mouth. The broken crutches, the denied food, the constant humiliations, and the plans to send her to a boarding school in Switzerland without my real consent. Deborah looked from Edward to Louisa, then to Julianne, her eyes calculating rapidly. Edward, darling, you're exhausted after the dinner, clearly confused. We can talk about this tomorrow when... There will be no tomorrow, Deborah. Not for us. The meaning of those words hit Deborah like a physical blow. For the first time since Julianne had met her, the perfect mask of control fell away completely, revealing the contorted face of a desperate woman. You can't be serious. Because of a few misunderstandings? All I've ever done was for the good of this family, for our marriage. Mistreating an innocent child? Isolating her from her own father? Breaking her crutches so she couldn't move? Edward's voice rose slightly. What kind of person does that, Deborah? What kind of monster? Monster! Deborah let out a sharp, hysterical laugh. I'm the monster. I who sacrificed my life, my career, to raise a child that isn't even mine. While you were hiding on business trips, running from your responsibilities, I was here dealing with everything alone. You weren't raising my daughter. You were psychologically torturing her, neglecting her basic needs, making her believe she was a burden, that her own father rejected her. And wasn't it true? Deborah advanced a step, her eyes shining with angry tears. You avoided her, Edward. You would go weeks without even asking about her. When was the last time you read Louisa a story, attended one of her school performances, were present for a doctor's appointment? Edward recoiled as if he'd been slapped. Deborah's words, though twisted by her rage, carried a painful truth he could not deny. You're right. His voice was low now. I failed as a father. I allowed my pain, my grief for Clara, to blind me to the needs of my own daughter. He glanced briefly at Louisa, who was watching the scene with wide eyes. But that doesn't justify what you did. Nothing justifies it. Yes, it does. Deborah screamed, losing control completely. She is a constant reminder of Clara. A ghost in our house. As long as she exists, you will never be entirely mine. The silence that followed that confession was deafening. Edward stared at his wife as if seeing her for the first time, truly seeing her, beyond the facade of sophistication and dedication. So that's it. His voice was a horrified whisper. All because of jealousy. Of a child. Of a memory. You don't understand. Deborah tried to compose herself, realizing she had revealed too much. I just wanted to help. The boarding school would have been best for her. Specialized care and adapted education. Enough lies, Edward cut her off sharply. I want you out of this house by morning. My lawyers will be in touch about the next steps. Deborah's face transformed. All vulnerability vanished, replaced by a calculating coldness. You can't do this. Half of this house, half of everything you own is mine by right. Take whatever you want. Jewelry, cars, money. I don't care. Edward turned his back on her. But you will never go near my daughter again. Deborah stood frozen for a moment, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Then slowly a cold smile formed on her lips. This isn't over, Edward. You will regret this. And as for you... She turned to Julianne, her eyes burning with hatred. You will pay for this, one way or another. With those words, Deborah turned and stormed out of the room, slamming the door forcefully behind her. The sound echoed through the silent mansion, like the closing of an act in a dramatic play. Edward remained motionless for a few moments, as if absorbing the impact of what had just happened. Then slowly he turned to Louisa, who was watching him with a mixture of fear and hope. It's okay, my princess. He sat beside her on the bed, taking her small hands in his. It's over. No one will ever hurt you again. I promise. Louisa looked at her father, then at Julianne, who remained near the door, still processing the intensity of the confrontation she had witnessed. Is Julianne leaving too? The girl asked, her voice small. Edward looked at Julianne, a silent question in his eyes. I don't know. That's up to her. Julianne felt the weight of that moment, the responsibility of the choice she had to make. She looked at Louisa, at the small face that had lit up in her presence over the past weeks, at the child who had trusted her when she had no one else. No. Julianne took a step forward, a soft smile forming on her lips. I'm not going anywhere. If you'll have me, this is where I'll stay. The smile that lit up Louisa's face at that moment was worth every risk, every fear, every uncertainty Julianne had faced. It was the smile of a child who finally, after so long in the shadows, was beginning to glimpse the light. 5 years had passed since that fateful night in the Sinclair mansion. Time, that relentless transformer, had brought profound changes for everyone involved in that story of pain, courage and redemption. The mansion remained majestic, with its impeccably manicured gardens and imposing architecture, but the atmosphere within its walls was unrecognizable compared to what Julianne had found on her first day of work. What was once a cold and oppressive place had been transformed into a true home, where laughter echoed through the hallways and love flowed freely. On that sunny Saturday morning, Julianne woke up early, as usual. At 33, she maintained the same energy and determination, though her eyes now held a wisdom that only transformative experiences can bring. She dressed comfortably and went down to the kitchen, where Sonia, who had remained with the family, was already preparing an elaborate breakfast. "Good morning, Jules." The cook smiled affectionately. "The special coffee is ready, and those banana pancakes Louisa loves so much." "Thanks, Sonia. She's going to need her energy today." Julianne poured herself some coffee, enjoying the familiar aroma. "I'm so proud of her. And nervous, too. We all are. But that girl has the strength to move mountains. She's going to do wonderfully." Julianne smiled, knowing Sonia was right. Louisa, now 12, was no longer that fragile, fearful child. She had transformed into a confident, intelligent, and determined preteen, who faced her physical condition not as a limitation, but as part of who she was. The sound of footsteps in the hallway announced Edward's arrival. At 47, he too had changed profoundly. The distant, work-consumed man had given way to a present and loving father, who had completely reorganized his life to prioritize his daughter. Business trips had been drastically reduced, and a full office had been installed in the mansion so he could work from home whenever possible. "Good morning, family." He entered the kitchen, smiling, kissing Julianne softly on the lips. "Is our champion awake yet?" "Not yet. I thought it best to let her sleep in a little. Yesterday's rehearsals were exhausting." Edward nodded, pouring himself some coffee, wise as always. "But knowing our daughter, I bet she's already awake reviewing her notes." Our daughter. The words, spoken so naturally now, still made Julianne's heart swell in her chest. The path to this point hadn't been easy, but every step had been worth it. After Deborah's departure from the mansion, the first few months had been a period of difficult adjustment. Edward struggled to reconnect with Louisa, to overcome years of emotional absence, while the girl, though relieved by her stepmother's departure, still carried deep scars from the psychological abuse she had suffered. Julianne had remained as a bridge between father and daughter, no longer as an employee but as a counselor, friend and mother figure. Slowly, with patience and love, the three had created a new family dynamic, based on honesty, respect, and above all, genuine presence. Edward and Deborah's divorce was finalized a year after their separation. Deborah received a generous financial settlement on the condition that she renounce all contact with Louisa and move out of the country. As far as they knew, she now lived in Europe, remarried to a French businessman. The relationship between Edward and Julianne had evolved naturally, without rush. The mutual respect and admiration they felt for each other blossomed into a deep, mature love. They married in an intimate ceremony in the mansion's garden, 2 years after the events of that fateful night. Louisa, radiant in a sky-blue dress, had carried the rings, her crutches adorned with flowers and ribbons for the occasion. 6 months after the wedding, the adoption process was completed, and Julianne officially became Louisa's mother. The celebration that followed was one of the most emotional moments of their lives. Louisa, legally blessed with 2 last names, 2 people who loved her unconditionally, a complete family at last. "Good morning, family." Louisa's cheerful voice pulled Julianne from her thoughts. The girl entered the kitchen wearing a pantsuit in her school colors, her brown hair pulled back in an elaborate braid. Her crutches, personalized with colorful stickers, moved skillfully as she approached the table. "Good morning, champ." Edward stood up to hug his daughter. "Ready for the big day?" "Was more than ready." Louisa smiled, her eyes shining with a confidence that would make any parent proud. "I reviewed the speech 3 more times before bed. I think I could recite it in my sleep. I don't doubt it for a second. Julianne poured a glass of orange juice for her daughter. But first, breakfast. You need energy to shine on that stage. Banana pancakes, Louisa exclaimed upon seeing the plate Sonia placed before her. My favorite. Thanks, Sonia. The family sat down for breakfast, chatting excitedly about the day's event. Louisa had been selected to represent her school, the prestigious St. Monica's Preparatory School, in a statewide public speaking competition. Among hundreds of students, she had earned the right to present her speech in the final round, which would take place that afternoon at Carnegie Hall in New York City. Nervous? Edward asked, watching his daughter tenderly. A little. But it's the good kind of nervous, you know? The kind that makes you more alert. Louisa took a sip of juice. Besides, even if I don't win, just being there is already a victory. Who would have thought that I, of all people, would be representing the school in a public speaking competition? I would have. Julianne smiled, stroking her daughter's hair. From the very first day, I knew you were special. You had a light inside you just waiting for a chance to shine. Louisa hugged Julianne impulsively. Thanks, Mom, for believing in me when I didn't even believe in myself. The title of Mom, even after 3 years, still made Julianne emotional. It was a privilege she never took for granted, an honor she carried with reverence. Well, if we're done with breakfast, I suggest we get ready. Edward checked his watch. Oswald will have the car ready in an hour, and I want to arrive well in advance so Louisa can get familiar with the theatre. Oswald, another remnant of the old days, had kept his position as the family's driver. His role on that decisive night was never forgotten, and Edward had ensured he was properly valued and respected as an essential member of the household. An hour later, the Sinclair family left the mansion. Louisa, in the back seat between Edward and Julianne, reviewed her notes one last time, her lips moving silently as she recited parts of her speech. What was the theme of the competition again? Oswald asked, looking in the rearview mirror with an affectionate smile for Louisa. What family means to me, the girl replied, putting her notes in her folder. When the teacher announced it, I knew immediately what I wanted to say. It was as if the theme was made especially for me. It was. Edward took his daughter's hand. No one in that competition has a story as powerful as yours. Carnegie Hall, with its majestic architecture, was specially decorated for the event. Colorful banners announced the 15th Annual State Youth Oratory Competition, and groups of students from various schools, accompanied by family and teachers, converged on the venue. As they entered, they were greeted by Mrs. Helen, Louisa's advisor and head of the St. Monica's team. Louisa, so glad you're early. The teacher, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, hugged her student warmly. The contestants are gathering in the side hall for final instructions. You'll be the 5th to present, out of 12 finalists. Perfect, Louisa replied, adjusting her crutches. Not too early to get super nervous, not too late to be exhausted from waiting. Always the optimist, Helen smiled, then turned to Edward and Julianne. You have raised an extraordinary young woman. Everyone at school is extremely proud of her. The credit is all hers, Julianne replied sincerely. Louisa has an inner strength that inspires us every day. After the final instructions and a tight hug from her parents, Louisa followed the other contestants backstage. Edward and Julianne found their seats in the audience, in the 3rd row, a prime position to watch every detail of their daughter's performance. I'm as nervous as she is, Edward confessed, squeezing Julianne's hand. More, probably. Me too, Julianne smiled. But she's going to be amazing. There's something special when she speaks, an authenticity that touches people. The theatre filled up quickly. At 2 o'clock sharp, the lights dimmed, and the Master of Ceremonies took the stage to begin the event. After the acknowledgements and explanations of the judging criteria, the first contestant was called. The speeches were varied and touching, each young person bringing their unique perspective on the meaning of family. Stories of grandparents raising grandchildren, blended families after separations, bonds that transcended blood. Each performance drew enthusiastic applause from the audience. When it was Louisa's turn, Julianne's heart felt like it would leap out of her chest. Beside her, Edward held her hand tightly, the emotion evident on his face. Representing St. Monica's Preparatory School with the theme, What Family Means to Me, please welcome Louisa Sinclair Perry. Applause echoed through the theatre, as Louisa walked onto the stage. She moved confidently with her crutches, her face serene, dressed in her school's impeccable uniform. She positioned herself at the center of the stage, adjusted the microphone to her height, and after a brief moment to breathe, began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed judges, fellow competitors, good afternoon. My name is Louisa. I am 12 years old, and today I want to share with you what I've learned about the true meaning of family." Her voice, clear and strong, filled the theater with a surprising authority for someone so young. There was no trace of nervousness, only the conviction of someone who deeply understands the subject she is speaking about. At 7 years old, I believed that family was just a biological concept, those who share our blood, who gave us life. Today I know that family goes far beyond that. Family are the people who choose to love us, to protect us, and to stay by our side, especially in the most difficult times. Louisa paused strategically, her eyes scanning the audience, connecting with each person present. Many of you see me here today and see only a girl on crutches, but my crutches are not my story. They are just a part of who I am, like my brown eyes or my love for banana pancakes. A soft laugh rippled through the audience, breaking the initial tension. My real story is about how I found my true family in the most unlikely of circumstances. It's about how a courageous woman, who initially came into my life as a simple housekeeper, risked everything to show me that I deserved to be loved. And about how her example woke my father from the long sleep of grief, allowing him to finally see me, truly see me, for the first time in years. In the audience, Julianne felt tears streaming freely down her face. Edward, equally emotional, put his arm around her shoulders, both of them mesmerized by their daughter's strength on stage. There was a time when I was taught to believe I was a burden, that my crutches were a source of shame, that my existence was an inconvenience to those around me. Louisa's voice trembled slightly, but she recovered masterfully. I lived in a luxurious mansion, but I was a prisoner in my own room. I had everything money could buy, but I was starving, not just for proper food, but for love, for acceptance, for worth. A reverent silence fell over the theater. There was not a single pair of eyes not fixed on the young speaker, not a single heart that did not feel the weight of her words. It was then that Julianne came into my life. With small acts of kindness, a hidden sandwich, a secretly told story, a sincere compliment, she planted the seeds of my own self-worth. She saw me not as the girl on crutches, but as Louisa, a whole person, worthy of respect and love. Louisa shifted her position slightly on stage, leaning on her crutches with natural elegance. The most amazing part? She risked everything, her job, her financial security, her own reputation, for a child she barely knew. When asked why she did it, her answer was simple: because it's the right thing to do. Those words changed my life forever. Julianne's tears flowed faster, remembering that exact moment, that conversation with Louisa in her small, austere room. My father, a good man who had lost himself in his own pain after losing my biological mother, found his courage through the example of this extraordinary woman. Together they saved me, not just from an abusive situation, but also from the terrible belief that I didn't deserve to be loved. They showed me that my crutches are not a prison, but powerful wings that allow me to fly in my own way. Louisa slightly lifted one of her crutches, a symbolic gesture that drew spontaneous applause from the audience. With a serene smile, she waited for silence to return before continuing. 3 years ago, Julianne officially adopted me. On that day, I legally gained what I already possessed in my heart: a mother who chose me, who fought for me when no one else would, and my father, who found the courage to face his own demons, became the man I always knew he could be. Edward couldn't contain a sob, squeezing Julianne's hand as if it were his anchor. So what does family mean to me? It means choice. It means courage. It means staying when it would be easier to leave. It means seeing value where others see only a burden. It means love that transcends blood, social class, and circumstances. Louisa took a final pause, her eyes meeting Julianne's and Edward's in the audience, a soft smile lighting up her face. Today, I stand before you not despite what I've been through, but because of it. My experiences have taught me that family is not defined by DNA, but by the daily choices we make to love, protect, and be present for one another. And if there is one lesson I would like you to take from here today, it is this. Sometimes the strongest family bonds are those we consciously forge, one act of courage and love at a time. The silence that followed lasted only a second before the entire audience rose to their feet in a thunderous ovation. People were openly wiping away tears, applauding with fervor, some shouting "Bravo!" From different parts of the theater. Louisa, with a grace surprising for her age, took a careful bow before leaving the stage, her crutches moving with the same confidence with which her words had touched every person present. In the audience, Edward and Julianne remained standing, clapping until their hands hurt, their faces streaked with tears of pride and overflowing love. "She's incredible," Edward whispered. "Absolutely incredible." "Yes," Julianne agreed, her heart so full it felt like it couldn't fit in her chest. "She always was." The subsequent presentations, though touching, failed to match the emotional impact left by Louisa. When all the finalists had presented, the judges retired to deliberate. During the intermission, Louisa joined her parents in the audience, receiving tight hugs and emotional words of pride. Dozens of strangers approached to congratulate her, some sharing how her story had resonated deeply with their own experiences. "It doesn't matter what the result is," Louisa said, sitting between Edward and Julianne. "I already feel like a winner just for getting to share our story." "You are a winner," Edward confirmed. "And you've made us the proudest parents in the world." When the judges returned and the Master of Ceremonies took the stage again, an expectant silence fell over the theatre. After the formal thanks came the announcement. In third place, representing St. Ignatius Academy, Matthew Oliveira. Enthusiastic applause followed the young man to the stage, where he received his trophy and certificate. In second place, representing the New Horizon Educational Institute, Carolina Mendez. More applause, more celebrations. The tension grew as everyone awaited the announcement of the grand winner. And in first place, with a presentation that deeply touched us all, representing St. Monica's Preparatory School, Louisa Sinclair Perry. The theatre erupted in applause. Edward and Julianne hugged their daughter, who seemed genuinely surprised by the win. With tears of joy, Louisa made her way to the stage, receiving the golden trophy with hands trembling with emotion. At the microphone, for her words of thanks, she was brief and powerful. "This award isn't just mine. It belongs to everyone who has ever felt invisible, inadequate, or less worthy for being different. And most of all, it belongs to my parents, my father Edward, who found the courage to change, and my mother Julianne, who taught me that sometimes the greatest life lessons come from the most unexpected sources. Thank you for turning my crutches into wings." The celebration that followed was just the beginning of a new chapter in the Sinclair family's life. Louisa's speech, recorded and shared on social media, went viral in the following weeks. Invitations for interviews, speaking engagements, and even a book deal began to pour in. But for Julianne, the real miracle was much simpler and more profound. Seeing Louisa flourish, confident and whole, knowing that her place in the world was exactly where she was, loved, valued, complete. That night after the celebrations, when Louisa was already asleep with the trophy beside her bed, Edward and Julianne stood on the mansion's balcony, watching the stars. "You know you completely changed our lives, don't you?" Edward held Julianne's hand, his eyes reflecting a gratitude that words could never adequately express. "You changed mine too," Julianne replied, resting her head on her husband's shoulder. "I guess that's what real families do. They transform each other, grow together, become better for each other's presence." Louisa was right in her speech. Family really is about choosing to love, even when it would be easier to walk away. About seeing value where others see only a burden. Julianne smiled, thinking of the extraordinary journey that had brought them here. From a young, unemployed woman, desperate for work, to a fulfilled woman with a family that valued every part of her. From a broken, isolated child to a confident preteen who inspired others with her story. From a man lost in his grief to a present and loving father. "Do you know what impresses me most?" Julianne said, looking up at the stars. "How small acts of courage can trigger enormous transformations. It all started with a simple no, when I refused to ignore the suffering of a child I barely knew. And that no became the biggest yes of our lives." Edward kissed her forehead tenderly. "The yes to a real family, the yes to a life full of meaning and purpose. Embraced under the starry sky, Edward and Julianne reflected on the everyday miracles they had witnessed over the past 5 years. Louisa's emotional scars slowly healing with patience and consistent love. Edward's transformation, from an absent father to a pillar of strength and presence. And Julianne's own journey, from a fearful housekeeper to a confident mother and beloved wife. The Sinclair mansion, once a place of shadows and secrets, now radiated light and love, a living testament that the strongest families are those built, not by obligation or blood, but by conscious choice. The choice to stay, to fight, to love unconditionally. And at the center of this transformation, a girl on crutches who had taught everyone around her that our greatest apparent limitations can become our most powerful wings when we find people brave enough to help us fly. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Julianne and Louisa has deeply touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories that explore the transformative power of love and courage. Find it here by clicking on the left. If this narrative sparked something in you, be sure to subscribe to our channel and give the video a like. Every day we bring you unique stories that explore the complexity of life, the challenges we face, and the beauty we find when we choose to love, despite everything. Share your own family stories in the comments. We want to know how you define this special bond. Until the next story, always remember that, as Louisa taught us, sometimes our greatest limitations can turn into powerful wings with the right people by our side.